Well, good to see you all. Thank you for staying. Let's do a check. Are we online? Are we live streaming? From the folks in the control room. Wait till I get the word from David. We're good? All right. Well, let's get going. So first, talking about sabbatical, we probably need to define the term just to make sure we're all on the same page. Sabbatical comes from Sabbath, which is based on God taking a day off, even in creation, the seventh day. There's a long tradition about even letting the land lay fallow every 7 years for a time of refreshment, regrowth, new beginning. I was taught growing up that most things in life, you've heard me say this, most things in life it's important to start and end with gratitude. So I'm going to start with gratitude. I'm incredibly grateful to have had this opportunity to be away, to travel, to reconnect, to be. Sometimes people ask me what the hardest part of being a priest is. It's hard to define, but I think it's the psychic and spiritual toll it can take. And there needs to be time of refreshment and renewal. My spiritual director uses this image. He said, you must never become a pipe that only is a source of water passing through you, but doesn't nourish you. Isn't that lovely? Meditate on that. So I'm grateful for Sabbath. So this is a quote from the letter I sent out to the parish defining what I hoped sabbatical would be. I said, I'm planning for reconnection in at least 3 directions: with God, with family and friends, and with myself. So I hope as we go through some 100 slides, pay attention and see if these 3 themes happen. Reconnection with God, family and friends, and with myself. As kind of a preparatory experience that we didn't plan on, Patty and I went to we'd gone over for a short weekend to the beach in Delaware, not even the whole part of the weekend. It was back in the winter still, and we were on the beach and it was deserted. And we walked over and she said, I need to show you something. And somebody had written on this deserted beach, Psalm 46:10, be still, I don't have it all there, be still and know that I am God. We just found this on the beach. We didn't see who had written it or where it came from. So, first part of sabbatical, I wanted to go to a different place. I wanted to do something very different. In high school and in college, I always studied French, never studied Spanish. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to go to a place where I'm surrounded by Spanish to start learning? So, and I'd never been to Latin America. So I went for a Spanish immersion class in Costa Rica. So, views from Costa Rica. This is the facility in which I was studying. It was called Maximo Nivel. Costa Rica is a beautiful country. I also spent a lot of time right on the ocean. You see the trees, some of the wildlife, these amazing monkeys that they had. A fascinating part that I didn't expect of this class was almost everybody in it was in their 20s. Lots of college students. So these guys were in my immediate group. Maxime, whose native language is French. Lucas, whose native language is German. He's from Austria. And me. And I lived for the week with a host family. So almost all of the conversation was in Spanish. A lot of it was nodding and waving. Home-cooked meals. Other American college students were there. So it was a beginning. As I say to our amazing Hilma, poco a poco, little by little, muy bien. And as you know, if you've ever been studying another language, it's not just the language, it's studying the culture and the people. And I met some amazing, gracious people in Costa Rica. I could imagine spending a lot more time there. It was humid, probably like I've never experienced before. What I didn't plan on was I was there in the rainy season. First night of class, I got separated from everybody else, and I had to get home, and this massive rainstorm came. The streets in the town where I was staying, Capos, have no street signs. So you can't exactly Google the way home. And I'm wandering, no umbrella, and it just starts to deluge, downpour. And I went from awning to awning, hanging out under these little bits of roof. And finally, I offered up a little prayer. Lord, I need to find my house. And here came this woman. And she started staring at me. It turns out I was standing in front of her house. She wondered naturally what that was about. But I was able to communicate to her the names of the people with whom I was staying. And she said, follow. And she led me to their door. So, thank you, Lord. I also, as I said, tried to spend some time in the national, particularly in Manuel Antonio National Park, just a beautiful, beautiful place. That's in Capos. And then sort of a passing view from as we're leaving. Y'all can leave that. I'll take care of it. Thank you. What we didn't plan on in engaging Sabbatical was that at the very beginning, Patty's mom would die. So this is Dorothy. Dorothy had been a resident of Goodwin House here in Alexandria since 2018. Amazing woman, Massachusetts native through and through. She'd been suffering from Alzheimer's for the past few years. It was a blessing to have her here. So coming back from Costa Rica, all of a sudden we had to all go to Massachusetts. And I had the great honor of preaching at her funeral. It was in Patty's Roman Catholic Church, in which she grew up. A very gracious priest who's been there for many years. As I was getting ready to speak, I figured he would read the gospel, but he gestured to me. He's like, you read it. I'm like, I don't have it. So he looked it up. So pray for the repose of the soul of Dorothy. And we give thanks for her heritage in so many ways. So then it was something very different. You'll notice some very different themes as we go along. It was off to the west. I have long wanted to spend more time in the west, and I ended up doing this leg all by myself. So I flew into Denver after my flight being delayed at Dulles for 5 hours and literally falling asleep on the floor, and then getting into Denver at like 4 in the morning. Time change making it even worse. But I got this little rental car. You'll see this car show up. I call it my trusty steed. A little Chevy Spark, amazing on gas. And my first stop, the sub-theme of Sabbatical, was exploring national parks. So I went to the Rocky Mountain National Park. And there's just a series of pictures. I mean, I personally had not spent time in the Rockies. So I was just blown away. This is June. I got higher and higher and higher and higher. And as you probably know, the snow melt from up in these mountains is what feeds the mighty Colorado River, which is what really sustains much of the Southwest. This is where it starts. Trusty steed in the mountains. Wow. Then this is starting to do something different the next day, driving all the way across Colorado from there and into Utah in the trusty steed. A couple of scary experiences. Coming into Utah in this tiny car, it was so windy. It was like turbulence on a plane. I had to pull over a couple times. I really started to think, this thing could flip over. The Colorado River, following it. This is Thelma and Louise country. You've seen that movie? Literally, a lot of it was filmed right here. I'd never been to Utah before.
What movie?
Thelma and Louise. I just had to keep pulling over and looking and listening and taking photos. So remember, one of the themes was reconnection with God through nature. And then I arrived at St. Christopher's Mission in Navajo land, in the Navajo Nation. I learned a whole lot about this mission. I'll just tell you briefly. Joe Hubbard, who used to be a seminarian here and spent time with us, serves this mission. So part of Sabbatical was to spend time with Joe, to spend time with the Navajo. You know our connection with pumpkins, I imagine, with the Navajo. And I learned amazing things about this St. Christopher's Mission. There was a priest in the 30s and 40s named H. Baxter Liebler. He was a gentrified rector in Connecticut. He founded a church in Greenwich, Connecticut that still exists. He spent more and more time out west, and he felt called in ministry to an area which in some ways had not been evangelized at all and among the Navajo. So he founded this mission. He was an old school high church priest, if that makes sense to you, Anglo-Catholic priest. Part of that tradition is that God seeks to meet us not just in one dimension, not just the soul, but that we are to care for the mind and the body, especially in a place where there was virtually no education or no health care. So this mission was meant to meet people in multi-dimensions. So what they did first was build this area. It was sort of a semi-monastic thing. In fact, they had a monk living with them. They had a nurse that they brought. They had a teacher. And this is where I stayed. Currently, Joe's parish is hoping to really engage this as a retreat center, developing these rooms. It's on the National Register of Historic Places. And you see that large bluff behind there? We'll come back to that. This is St. Christopher's Church, the more modern version. For many years, there was a log cabin version that burned. Beautiful old place. There's Joe, who graciously invited me to be celebrant for their community that day. Y'all remember Joe, right? Joe's from Alabama originally. And of all things, he felt called to native ministry. He spent a lot of time on Standing Rock Reservation in North Dakota. He was ordained in North Dakota and then had this call to the Navajo. He has these other churches too, the St. John the Baptizer, small church here. We went out to visit there. That's inside. Now back to that bluff. I wanted to be up on top of that bluff. So we climbed it. That's on the way up. That's what it looks like from up there. And you can really see the plan of the mission. The housing area, the church, the rectory off to the left. Those other buildings were the clinic, the infirmary, and the school. So I'm hoping we actually are starting maybe some partnership work with St. Christopher's Mission through our outreach. It would make all kinds of sense. My phone ran out of power, but we went way out in the country and we spent time in these little Navajo dwellings called hogans. And met his equivalent of his verger, a native Navajo man who served in Vietnam. He talked about then coming back and in some ways not feeling welcome in his own country and in his own culture, and how the church is pivotal to who he is. It was a holy moment. That's the only way I can describe it. Trusty Steed now heading out into Monument Valley, near there, way back on the dirt roads. Next national park, Arches. Some of you have probably been there. These just amazing natural formations. This is the Delicate Arch, the famous Delicate Arch that's actually on the license plates for Utah. Just geological marvels. things like, how does that stay up? How does that stay up? Remember the movie Forrest Gump?
Oh, yeah.
When he's doing his cross-country walk and run, this is where that was filmed, right? I kept thinking of, kept running into reminders of some of what we do here, there. This massive solar plant that's part of the Navajo Nation, built and operated by the Navajo. I couldn't even capture it all. It's a massive, and you see some of the transmission wires there. It's fascinating. It really is, it's another nation within our nation, and a very complicated relationship. Tribal authority, tribal police. There's still questions about how sovereignty overlaps. I learned a lot about the ways the Native Americans were lied to, abused, forcibly moved, forcibly driven on marches. You know a lot of that story. And yet, amazing people. We had dinner in a woman's home who told about being abused in a residential school and what that was like. And it was actually abuse at the hands of another Navajo. But it was part of that whole system. And she was a deputy general convention, and she spoke on the floor, the woman in whose home I'd had dinner. One of the massive dams, I think this is the, it's a dam on the Colorado River. It helps to dam up Lake Powell. On the Hoover. This isn't actually the Hoover, it's, yes. I drove over that bridge. So this is heading then to the third national park, Zion. Some of you have been there. I see heads nodding. Just gorgeous. So for those of you who've been there, one of the things you can really do if you feel adventurous is go hiking as it narrows. Through the narrows, you end up hiking in the river itself, and you go deeper and deeper and deeper. And one of the things I love in the canyon is just the way the light plays on all these mountains. I had to show you, this is a little standalone hotel. They had all these little cabins. I just thought that was the cutest thing, and I could park the steed right there. This is my favorite national park I've visited. This is Bryce Canyon. Bryce Canyon is this amazing geological wonder. They call these little hoodoos that have been formed over eons. This is called the amphitheater. I spent a lot of time right there, just staring and praying and you probably know I'm a real people person, but I knew part of this trip had to be alone. It had to be alone, just to pray, to take inventory, to think, and then to re-engage with people. A passerby took that picture, actually. Closer view of the hoodoos. This is hiking down into the hoodoos, looking up in the hoodoos. You see how it gets tighter and tighter and tighter. That's called Thor's hammer. Again, how does that stay up? I loved this place. You also regularly come across another natural thing. This is where a forest fire had burned. We generally think forest fires are bad, but they're clearly part of God's plan, nature's plan to clean the ground and start fresh. Trusty steed now in Salt Lake City. I thought I've got to go through Salt Lake City, which meant I had to go to the Mormon Tabernacle. Took a tour and really experienced the hard sell evangelism. And of course I asked some challenging questions about baptism for the dead, things they didn't want to talk about. Lovely people, but I thought we're going to have some theological discussion here. But somebody started practicing on the organ. It's an amazing organ. So I was able to just sit and take it in for a while. it did make me wish, we can learn some things from the Mormons, how they all go on their mission for a year or two. It's all about sharing the faith, sharing their story. This is the Episcopal Cathedral in Salt Lake City. So I did go by there. It was locked, but I went by there. And then started heading out west. And the Great Salt Lake is great. I mean, huge. On the interstate, you could pull right out onto the salt. I mean, there's no exit. You just pull out there. And it goes on and on and on. And then I had to drive all the way across northern Nevada. Northern Nevada is bleak, if you've ever done it. It was 105 degrees. Oh my goodness. It went on and on and on. Hot, stifling, desolate. And then I got to Lake Tahoe. As I started to climb, the temperature started to go down. Lake Tahoe was amazing, right on the Nevada-California border. Reminded me in some ways of the Sea of Galilee, coming out of a desert. Great place for hiking and being. Then yet something different, coming into California. I did an 8-day Ignatian retreat with the Jesuits at the Los Altos Retreat House. Again, I'm a people person, so I was a little apprehensive about 8 days in silence. The only time you speak is with your spiritual director you meet every day. Now, I did work, it was such a blessing. I had this 85-year-old priest who'd been a priest for 50 years, who'd sort of seen it all and done it all. And the first day I asked him about receiving, because there's daily mass. I said, because he knew who I was. I said, may I receive? He said, well, of course you'll receive with us. He said, when I'm at Grace Cathedral, I receive. I mean, it's just incredible welcome. There's a bit of the courtyard there. Continual theme, Jesus showing up. This statue kind of touched me in a very deep way. One of the things I worked on with my spiritual director was reviewing and writing a rule of life, which I'd love to lead a workshop here on sometime. If you were talking to somebody about the Christian life, what things should be in it? And there's a certain power in just getting it on paper, right? There's an element of learning, there's an element of study, there's an element of service, there's an element of worship, there's an element of stewardship. So this provided a framework to do that. But I told him for the first day, I can't spend all my time here. I've got to be out exploring. And he actually blessed that. He thought that was actually part of the retreat. So, reconnection. This is the Episcopal Church, San Mateo, California, where a friend of mine from seminary is rector. Called him out of the blue and went to show up. I didn't know this. We hadn't talked in years. He had just had a kidney transplant. So he and his wife and I were able to go out for a few hours and just talk. And he talked about how precious life is. I couldn't believe this. The donor for his kidney was his senior warden. Let that sink.
Looking at you, Gerald. Looking at you.
Let that sink in for a minute. Now, obviously, they've become good friends. But my friend Eric, he has a lot to say about what life means after going through that experience, and he's now back to work. Had to stop in Stanford University for a while. Love this building at Stanford. I can't zoom in, but it's Jesus and the disciple. And I don't know I think Susan took off, but I went by her church where she used to be rector, and I took a picture outside her church and sent it to her. Susan used to serve in this diocese. Trustee Steed at Stanford. Golden Gate Bridge. Part of my exploring was driving down parts of the Pacific Coast Highway and just stopping repeatedly. That is Grace Cathedral in San Francisco. Part of beauty was not only natural beauty, but human beauty. So time in museums. This is in San Francisco, the American Legion Museum, I believe it's called. They have an alien Skinner organ built right in there, and I stumbled across their weekly organ recital, so I took this to show Jane. Amazing organ. Rodin's The Thinker in the courtyard outside. And then I had to take this picture. You see the name of the street, Alexander Avenue. Can you see that? That's coming right off the Golden Gate Bridge, heading into Marin County, where I went to Muir Woods. I had to spend some time in the Redwoods. Wow. Then, major change, back to General Convention in Baltimore. I was an alternate deputy this time. I'd flown back on Wednesday, I think, went to Baltimore on Thursday. As part of General Convention, they had us test for COVID every day. Well, guess who came down with COVID? Guess who had to quarantine for 5 days alone in a hotel room in Baltimore? Couldn't even drive home because I'd taken the train up. So I thought, at least I can walk around the city. I was even there after convention left, which was surreal. Other people from our diocese and broader were amazing. They would leave food at my door. So I went walking around the city. This is where I used to serve when I served in Baltimore. This is Old St. Paul's. It's on Charles Street in Saratoga. So walking outside of it. Speaking of new relationships, this is my new nephew who was born in March. So I got to meet him and spend some time. This is Jaden. So I had to go unexpectedly down to Atlanta. My sister and my mother and family were living in Atlanta. I knew we were planning on all going down there to see them later. But what we didn't plan on was that my mom would die as well. So this is an earlier picture of Mom, obviously. It's amazing seeing that up on those walls. They discovered Mom had a tumor in her colon. She had to have surgery, which went fine, but then she got an unexpected, terrible infection, which meant a full, very involved surgery, and she didn't come out of that. So, didn't plan on that as part of Sabbatical, but even then, Sabbatical gave some time and space to grieve, because all of a sudden we were looking at another funeral, which I gave a eulogy. This is a nod back to my previous church, Mom and Dad, my sister. It's Patty holding Andrew there, I believe, in her arms. Everybody had to take turns holding Jaden. That's William. There's Andrew before. This is the lake next to the house where I grew up. This is the day of Mom's funeral. After just being around, I had to get out for a while by myself. This is the mountain I grew up staring at. I always felt centered and peaceful going over there. So this is in southwestern Virginia. Patty and I took back to the human beauty again. We took a day trip down to the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts in Richmond, just to be with some art. I was immediately drawn into this enfolding, beautiful image of Our Lady. Joey, the faithful husky, in the middle of it all. Part of what we've done for many years, we spend some time on the Outer Banks in North Carolina. So it was particularly nurturing this year. Peter's girlfriend, Amara, came with us. And then it was time to take Peter back to college. So here he is in front of his dorm, Ohio Wesleyan, and that's his girlfriend, Amara. And then Patty and Andrew and I just needed to get away. So we went down to Florida. So this is the Gulf, on of all places, Sanibel. That peaceful scene right there, which we experienced just a couple weeks later, was apparently like hell on earth. It's the lighthouse in Sanibel. Then we went up to St. Petersburg. I'd never been there. This was just a low-key trip using frequent flyer miles to get away. And this is hiking around here. This is Great Falls. And then this is back home, the rectory. And this was even prescient. We have a flag collection we rotate. You've probably seen this. We put the Union Jack out right before the Queen died. And it's been out since. So, back to those themes of reconnecting with God, friends and family, and myself. I think it showed up in a lot of unexpected ways. So. Questions, reactions, reflections. Yes.
Did you learn to speak any Navajo phrases when you were there?
Good question for those online. Did I learn to speak any Navajo phrases? A couple. It's a difficult language to learn. This priest I was talking about, one of the things that was so amazing about him is he became fluent in Navajo. Not only the language, but the culture. And he didn't disparage Navajo belief. He brought them alongside with Christian belief. A little the way St. Paul did. St. Paul in Athens, as he's walking around, he says, I see so many temples to all your gods, but there's this one, this temple to the unknown God, and he said, I will tell you who that is. There's, in our better moments, this amazing way to honor native culture and offer and blend respectfully. And the Navajo experienced him as that kind of respectful, believing person, and that's partly why he had such an effect on them. He was actually buried on the mission. So I learned a few little phrases I can't remember in the moment, but Joe's learning a lot of Navajo. They sing the hymns in Navajo. He greets them in Navajo. He preaches in English, but we had morning prayer every day out at the mission. It was really cool. Other questions, reactions?
Glad to hear Joe was doing so well. He was the seminarian at St. Mark's for 10 years.
That's right.
And we watched his message in Navajo land, so he's obviously going to be there for quite a while. I think that's kind of where his calling is. Am I correct?
His wife, Ashley, is in her senior year here. And she might be spending some time with us in January in the parish, yeah. Yes? Hopefully, one of the things I want to learn to do at a minimum is learn to say the Eucharist in Spanish. I haven't been able to practice, well, some of the events that happened took over, but I have done some of the online Babbel. Any of you familiar with Babbel? So I want to use that some, but yeah, that's a hope. I'd also like to learn to do the Eucharist in French, which would be easier for me, but Eileen.
Thank you so much for sharing your vision with us and
Thank you.
your sabbatical. As a parishioner, I had no expectations of what that would be, and I'm just thrilled that it seems to have been a source of renewal for you in lots of unexpected ways. And I wonder, coming back from this, do you have any thoughts, general thoughts about ways in which you
It's a great question. Let me see if I can summarize it for the folks online. Has the time helped me have any thoughts, reflections about the church, the Episcopal Church, adjusting, moving into this new time? I assume you mean specifically post-COVID and societal upheaval and change and growing secularism and all the rest. Is that fair summary? Sometimes I think God is up to a big sorting right now. And I think some of the sorting might be to help us move to a more serious place about discipleship. We're moving out of a more institutional Christendom model where it was assumed that most people go to church, which means there's more of an opportunity for witness now just by naming the fact that you go to church. But also, it seems pretty clear we've, not just in Emmanuel, but all over the world in the church, we've had a lot of people fall away, in some sense, people who are more cultural hangers-on. Got out of the habit. At the same time, and we're seeing this here, we're having a lot of newcomers show up, who in many cases seem to be quite serious about the faith, about learning and growing, about applying the faith to one's work life, about what does the faith mean for one's relationships, how do we define success and failure, how do we relate to the planet. You know, in other words, moving from just a 1 hour on Sunday mindset to all of life, which obviously is more what Jesus intended. You know, you've heard me say before, I don't think Jesus died on the cross for window dressing or respectability. He died to start a whole new way of life, to bring in the kingdom, Christ the King Sunday. So there's a lot that's scary that's changing right now. But there's a lot that's hopeful too. And as you see, even here at Emmanuel, we're working on saying we miss you. We need to be together. We need to come together, and both in person and online, and in lots of different small groups and form. But I hope, the simplest answer is I believe we're being called to a new level of discipleship. Discipleship that also includes outreach and justice, care for the planet, but also care for one's own walk with the Lord in a very serious way. Thank you for that question. Yes? I got a little lost when I pulled over in that windstorm, and I was worried the car was going to turn over. And in some places, the GPS was spotty, too. I brought an old-fashioned atlas, which was invaluable. There's something about having an atlas and tracing it with your finger. So that was about the only time I really got lost. Other than spiritually, I got lost several times.
Is your sabbatical for you or other clergy, is that a 7-year cycle? Like you mentioned?
Good question. Is it a 7 year? Generally, it is about 7 years. In the academic world, like professors here, it's usually more frequent for some reason. It seems to be more like 3 to 5 years. But generally for clergy, it's 7 years. One thing I was going to do that I had to cancel because of family stuff that happened, I was going to take a course with the Lombard Mennonite Center about conflict resolution and peacemaking. I'm hoping to maybe do that next year sometime, because I love the way they advertise it. This is a skill you can use not only in church, but in your family and everywhere in your life. And as a Southerner growing up who's inculcated with this notion that you have to please everybody and everybody has to get along, it's important to really learn and wrestle with how to fight well and respectfully, how to engage conflict. I tell couples getting married that all the time. And I also say all those years in New York helped me with that. I feel a little less that I have to please everybody. I commend it. Julie, you had a question?
I was just struck by the photographs of the cathedrals, and then what I consider the true cathedrals, like amidst the redwoods and amidst all the structures and rocks and rice and arches and places like that. I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about, cathedrals.
I would put it under the theme of beauty in general. And there did seem to be this back and forth that I didn't really plan between natural beauty and human beauty. So some of that human beauty was in the museums, some of it was in cathedrals, the retreat center. So I guess I think it's the same God who shows up in both. There's something about human creativity that is evidence of the divine. And I was thinking to you, actually, when I passed that solar farm. Wow. And the hydro dam. Anything else? Well, I'm so impressed and humbled that y'all stayed. Thank you. And I'll hang out at the back.
Was there anything in particular that came out of the sabbatical that you had not thought about before?
Good question. Teresa just asked, is there anything that came out of the sabbatical I hadn't really thought about? I'm going to be real honest with this one. I tried to be honest with all of them, but it was an in-the-face reminder of how easy it is to just live on a treadmill, even in church. We can get so caught up in the busyness that we don't take time to pray, don't take time to read. One of the aspects of my rule of life is to read one chapter of the Bible a day. I thought, surely that's manageable. So right now I'm reading in the minor prophets. I'm reading Hosea. And I was so impressed by the Jesuits and by my spiritual director particularly. They engage a process called the examen every day. This was something St. Ignatius Loyola insisted on. And there are many different ways of doing it, but one, it's just a reflective time. What went well today? Where did God show up? Where did I fall short? Who did I hurt today? What do I need to do better tomorrow? And it's often done before going to bed, to just kind of let it go. So, a reminder of how easy it is to just stay on the treadmill. And that kind of showed up in Sam's sermon today, right? Just chill. But there's a lot in our faith that can help us with that if we pay attention to it. And it was a reminder of how important it is to have personal devotional practices. And there's a wealth of those, whether it be Lectio Divina, prayerfully reading a text, silence, centering prayer, weekday Eucharist, nature walks that you do prayerfully and intentionally, biking. It really comes down to intention, right? When we're going out to do something, inviting the presence of the Spirit to be with us. The Navajo are really good at that. It was inspiring to see how that can be. You know, they're very intentional about space, about creating a space, about presence. A lot of that could work equally well with Christianity. So, still more to think about that. And one of the reasons that the Anglican approach to Christianity works so well, in many cases with the Navajo, with natives in general, because we have a big presence throughout South Dakota, North Dakota, is our liturgy. Because in some ways, I mean, there are these very involved Navajo, Cherokee, Sioux religious rituals, sanctifying space and time and relationships, so they could see the same thing in what we do. So there was a natural bond even deeper than language in many ways. And in particular, some of the Navajos said that's partly why the higher church Episcopal liturgy matched so well. Because it's about moving with the body. It's about using incense, which they do. It's about chanting prayers, which they do. It's not all in your head. It's a full body experience. So it's fascinating to think about. But anybody else? Or y'all want to go home to lunch? Thank you.